morning. Welcome to the Point. In Lansing, the lame duck session continues while lawmakers prepare for new roles. In some cases, they'll be leaving Lansing. In other cases, they're moving to a new job. Such is the case for our first guest this morning, Senator-elect Winnie Brinks. First of all, congratulations on your election. You made some history now as a senator-elect, as both a female and a Democrat representing your district. First time that's happened in a while.
Yeah, it is. It's been nearly 100 years since we've had a woman from Grand Rapids serve in the state Senate. Eva McCall Hamilton was the very first ever, so I'm proud to be the second one from Grand Rapids, and it was a great victory on November 6th. We had a solid, early, decisive victory, so we feel really good about the campaign we ran and the spot we're in, and making a little bit of history is just makes it all the much better.
You will be representing a larger swath of Kent County on the other end of this building, and I should thank Leader Singh for allowing us to use his office to do this interview. As you move into the Senate, a couple of things are different. One is that the majority remains Republican, but Democrats come back with bolstered numbers, right. Picking up 5, if I'm not mistaken. That's the biggest pickup, as was explained to me by Senator Ananich, since Watergate. So that's significant in and of itself. Still, as I point out, in the minority, but with more leverage. So that's a little bit different. But it's different because the Senate works a little differently than the House. What's your anticipation as you move kind of across the hall?
Yeah, I keep hearing about the upper chamber and how it's different over there. So I'm excited to experience that. I think it'll be great to be in a what's been described to me as a more deliberative process. It's a smaller number of people, of course, with longer terms. So I think there's a greater opportunity to establish some relationships. And maybe this is a question that's coming, but as you know, we'll have a Democratic governor, and that's going to change the nature of what has to happen in this building, both in the House and in the Senate. And it's going to require us to be able to work together across the aisle in those chambers in order to send things to the governor that will actually be signed. So it's going to be incumbent upon us, not only because it's the upper chamber and they're supposed to be more mature and more experienced, but because it's going to be necessary for us if we're going to really govern effectively and well with a governor from a party that's not in the majority in the legislature.
And as an observer, and I say with due respect, some days they're more mature and deliberative. I mean, the process in this building has changed a lot over the past 25 years. And part of that has to do with partisanship. But you accurately point out that with divided government, it's different because you don't get all of your prerogatives and priorities as Republicans in the House and Senate, nor as the elected governor, who is a Democrat, will you get all of your priorities unless all of those groups work together. So where does that leave you? That puts you in the party of the governor-elect. So on one hand, you have that office as an advocate, but then you are going to be asked, I suspect, from that standpoint, to work with Republicans to try to get to those priorities. Does that put you and your Democratic colleagues in more of a position of both perhaps power and responsibility?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that assessment. We'll have a much greater opportunity to actually have some influence on what comes out of those chambers and what gets sent to the governor. So we not only are a larger minority, but we're a more diverse minority. I think with the governor in office, talking about the priorities that we all campaigned on for the last 2 years, there are going to be a lot of things where the voices of the Democrats are going to be really important, and it's going to be incumbent upon us to work together. And it's going to be hard for some people because they're not used to it. With one party trifecta state, right, with the Republicans being completely in charge of both chambers and the governor's office for 8 years, they're going to have to do things differently. So, I'm willing to come in and learn, to get to know some folks, and to help them understand how best to work with us. And I think there's going to be some bumps in the road, but I walk in with my hand extended in cooperation, and I'm really pretty hopeful at this point.
One of the things that I question is that because of this past 8 years, very few, if any, of the members on either end of this building have worked in divided government. And again, having never served, but having observed, it is different, and it is considerably different. How do you imagine, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, but how do you imagine this gets started? Because it just feels like it's going to be a little bumpy, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, it certainly will. You know, with the change with all the statewide offices, we're going to see a whole bunch of new administrations ramping up and setting their agendas, and we'll see the legislators with new leadership here in both chambers setting their priorities as well. There's going to be a bit of a get to know you period and get to know each other's agendas. So I think it could be a little bit of a slow start is my guess, and we'll have to just see what we can do from there. But I think that there are some clear priorities that were set out by the governor in her campaign, and I'm eager to work with her on those priorities. You know, continuing to make sure that every Michigander's got health care, making sure that we're addressing issues of water, clean water throughout the state, PFAS, Line 5. There's some hot topics that we need to address if our state is going to thrive. Continuing to work on education issues, and in Grand Rapids, making sure that we're addressing the needs of veterans, and that has implications throughout the state with those veterans homes. That there's a plan in the pipeline to build more of those. So there's a lot of issues I think that I'm ready to work on. I'm familiar with them. I've done a lot of work. It'll be great to have some new partners and to see where the governor wants to go with that.
Not that healthcare isn't, but when you talk about particular PFAS and the Grand Rapids Home for Veterans, those are very localized issues, and ones that, as you say, there, at least in the Veterans Home case, there is a plan, but all of that will be determined in part by the next legislature and the funding priorities and the budgeting that goes into that, as will the way that you address the PFAS issue. So how much of an advocate do you have to be when it comes to the budgeting process? Because the sad reality is both of those issues will take money.
Yeah, they will. And so there's already some plans in place for the veterans homes in terms of federal dollars and state dollars. And so I feel more comfortable about where that's at and the progress that's been made. On the PFAS contamination issue, that really is not just a localized issue, it's a statewide issue and even nationwide. So we're starting to see some movement at the federal level with Senators Peters and Stabenow, but also a bipartisan group of Congress people from Michigan have let it be known that that's an important concern for them. So we have some partners, and I'm hopeful that that will help bring some resources and enable Michigan to actually truly lead. And as home to so much fresh water, it really is our responsibility to be very proactive about that. It's been disappointing for me looking back over the last year that this body and the legislature has failed to really address it, to even start having a conversation about it until just this morning, and even then to talk about it for 1 hour. This is a huge, complex issue. Talk about it for 1 hour, to let only a few people speak, to not take very many questions at all. There are so many more questions that need to be answered. And so it's a big topic, it's a big endeavor, and the solutions are going to need to be big. So it's going to require us to work together. And as you said, resources will need to be allocated. So we need to find a way to do that. And the governor certainly is going to have to lead on it. The legislature is going to have to be willing to work with her on it. So I'm eager to be part of that conversation, and I'm hopeful that in the Senate I'll be able to have an opportunity to do not just policy but also appropriations. It's a little bit different in the House, that in that sense that we don't usually do both. At least in the minority we haven't been able to. So I'm anxious to be part of those conversations, and I think it'll be something that the Republicans will understand they need to be productive on that conversation.
Senator Ananek and Senator Hertel, for a number of reasons, are happy to see you elected, but for at least one, we haven't had a Democratic senator in our viewing area since Senator Schauer left. Now, two with Senator McCann, who, by the way, will be on this show. I should say properly, Senator-elect McCann, who will be on this show in 2 weeks. But given everything you just laid out, given divided government, given the Democrats control the governor's office, and given that you do have a larger number, it does change, because being in the minority across the board means that you're rarely going to get your point of view or your particular bill passed. But now there is a bigger responsibility on elected Democrats, even though you're still in the minority in the House and Senate. But do you feel there's a bigger responsibility now to try to get things done because you do have at least some of the levers and some of the very important levers of government?
Yeah, I agree with your assessment that we have a larger responsibility, but I would also say that I think that you have that responsibility when you're in the minority, a deeper minority as well, or when you don't have divided government as well. It's just a lot harder to be able to get it done. The responsibility is there, but the ability to get that stuff done is not. And that's probably been the greatest disappointment that I've had in the last 6 years, is being ready and able and willing to work on solutions, but being shut out of the process simply for political reasons, simply because they don't want somebody to have an opportunity to be successful. And so that's been a difficulty that I think will at least be abated somewhat by having divided government. And at some point, Grand Rapids is a significant city in the state of Michigan. It cannot be ignored. We're thriving, we're growing. It's a destination for all kinds of people who want to live there because of the quality of life. And there's some wonderful things, and I'm so proud of our city. I'm very pleased to be able to represent it, but it's an important part of our state, and so we can't be ignored by either party, and it would be a mistake for either the Republicans or the Democrats to think that my voice should not be part of those solutions that have such a great impact for not only our region in West Michigan, but for the state as a whole in terms of our economic well-being, and our cultural presence, and our ability to just grow and thrive as a state.
Up next, our conversation with another member of the Senate who is leaving because of term limits after 16 years. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Senator Mike Nofs is retiring, term limited, after 16 years. The limit is actually 14 years, but because he filled a partial term, he served for 2 years longer than most. He talks about some of that time in the legislature. Senator, as you and I speak, you've just given your farewell speech on the floor. This will air later, but give me your thoughts. You've just walked off the floor after 16 years?
16 years.
That you've been here?
Yeah.
Because you took a partial term in the Senate, so you got a couple of years more than...
I did. I'm the Dean of the Senate, they call me. Not the oldest serving, but the longest serving in office.
What's it feel like knowing that this time, 3 rewrites of the energy bill over that period of time? I mean,
Michigan Telecommunications Act, the video franchising fee, all that stuff dealing with technology, and just recently the 5G technology for our cell phones to be able to go from 4G to 5G technology, and writing that legislation that will affect every city, township, and village in this state, and getting that, it's on the way to the governor's desk as we passed it yesterday. And so it's just his signatures needed, and that will be the law of the land. And so it's been very exciting. I love challenges, so I loved it because I was chair of that committee that had a lot of fast-changing, very important issues of the day that were affecting a lot of your residents and or my constituents. And so being able to tackle that, because you have so many entities that are involved that want it written this way, that way, they got their issue that they want to protect, or their company, whoever they're representing, as well as individual citizens back home. Some don't like the 5G technology, want to try to stop it or put some safeguards in it, and others wanted it and wanted it as quick as they could get it because they do business and they need to be able to do that. And so it really has been exciting because it involves so many people, you interact with so many people, and I really have been blessed in having the individuals, people, they're very respectful, even if they didn't get their way. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. But when you've been here so long, you have a reputation. The word gets out that this is a straight shooter. He tells the truth, and he'll listen. His door's always open, even though you might be opposed to what he's doing. He wants to hear your viewpoint. And I would tell everybody, whether they're for my legislation or against it, even up to the last minute before I put it on the floor and we vote, if you got an idea to make it better, and I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, I don't care if you're for it or against it, but it just makes it better, I'll take that and put it on that bill before we put it up for a vote and try to get it done, because all I'm interested in, and I think everybody gets elected that comes up here, Republican and Democrat, are trying to make Michigan better.
I am reminded that in this office there was another straight shooter who had an open door policy, and I was here one day when a group of folks from Abate came to talk to then Judiciary Chairman William Van Regenmoorder.
Loved him.
And there was no way on the face of the earth he was going to be in favor of doing away with the helmet law.
Me either.
Yet he, in the most respectful way, talked with that group of people for at least 35 minutes. And they all walked out of here feeling really good about him, knowing full well he was not going to be in favor of their cause. Do we get enough of that up here these days?
I'm not sure we do. Term limits, people come from different perspectives. I love the institution, respect the institution, and love people like Senator Bill Van Regenmoorder. And I served with him in the House when he went and did his final term as Representative Bill Van Regenmoorder. Great guy. He was criminal law. I can't remember the name of the committee at the time, but I was on that committee, being a former policeman. I loved working with him. He taught me how to be a chairman. But you're right. The whole deal is that people, even though if you're honest, straight up forward, come in, listen to them, and just say to their face, sorry, you and I don't see eye to eye on this one. I am not going to do that. And here's why. They respect you for that because, number one, you're telling them up front, you're not hiding, you're not doing the secret thing. You'll say one thing to my face and go do something else. I never did that. He never did that. And I don't think anybody around here, if you could find somebody to say I was different than what I just said I was, then I think a lot of times that is lost. And I would hope that people would see the examples that we try to live by and respect the institution and the individuals and how you're supposed to conduct business. And I would hope others would carry on that the very nice tradition.
When you were first elected, and I should point out, you mentioned law enforcement, but you spent a long career with Michigan State Police and before that with local law enforcement, but the most of the time with Michigan State Police to post commander?
Yes.
So you knew what it was like to be in charge.
Right.
You knew what it was like to work with people.
Right.
But when you came into the House of Representatives, what was your expectation 16 years ago versus what the reality was?
Well, number one, it was interesting in the House because you had so many members in this little caucus room, and your chance to get up and speak and try to convince 56 or 58 or 63, the first term I was in, that we would be able to convince people to vote for something that you thought was smart and or good, or voice your opinion. And you learn that all the time you're not able and or have the time. If we had to do that on everything we voted on, we'd be here forever and not get anything done. And so you had to learn to pick and choose and when to sit up and when to speak. And when I got in the Senate, obviously it's a lot smaller in a caucus room and you can tell your viewpoints, but people get tired of one person talking all the time also. And so you had to learn to be respectful, and when you had something valuable to add to the conversations when you spoke up, and that was the thing that being, like you said, the post commander, I always spoke, people listened, and county board chair, same thing. I listened, but I also then spoke. So I was sort of used to, being at the top of the chart, but when you get in there, you're just one of them. And it's a whole different dynamic, and you finally learn how it works is you got to develop relationships, whether it be in your caucus or the other caucus, to be able to get things done, because you're not always going to get Republicans to vote for your issue. And there's a lot of times I got a lot of Democrats to vote for my issue that helped me get that legislation passed. And so I think that's another thing that we're losing. We're so partisan today, it seems. I've always been a moderate. I've been in the middle. I think that's where the citizenry is, most of them. They're center-right, I think, generally. It's moved a little more left recently in this last election, as you can tell by the results. But that happens. But most people are in the middle, and they will listen in what makes some common sense. And when you lose common sense up here, that's when you're ineffective.
You said it, but I'll make the observation that the partisan divide in this city has become greater with each passing election. You have not always been that partisan, as you point out.
Right.
As your caucus has become more partisan, and I think really perhaps more in the House, but certainly in the Senate to some degree, has that made it more difficult for you to be able to navigate the waters?
It actually is. When the Tea Party came on strong, they didn't want to listen to a lot of moderates, or what they used to refer to, and I've been labeled before, a rhino, Republican in name only. That didn't bother me. My mom taught me a long time, sticks and stones don't break bones, names will never hurt you. So just let that blow off, which I did. You still can be effective because you develop those relationships, and then they see why you feel the way you do. And the biggest important thing is I try to remember all the time I was here, it's not about Mike Nofs. It's about the citizens of the 19th Senate District. I am representing them, and if the general opinion and philosophy back home, and if you're doing your work, you'll know and be able to gauge what the general feeling is, what you should do and how you should vote. And there are a lot of times I voted for things that, I personally, thought, I don't totally believe in this, but that's what the people want. I don't think it's going to hurt anybody, so you should go with what your constituents want.
And there were times when you didn't vote on the Republican line.
That's true. I did not. And there are times, again, they're like, well, we can't count on Nofs' vote. He's just not always going to be there. I like that. It gives you a little more power and stuff. So when they do need you, you can actually put your input in there to get your support. It helps in maybe changing the legislation a little bit. Not always, but there are times when they really do need you because, the issue is so big and there's so many factions, wanting what they want with it, and they can't get everybody on board. They'll come to you and say, what is it going to take to get you on board? And then you say, I'd like to have this sentence or this paragraph changed or this, put in there, and then I would be supportive of the bill. I think it would make it better.
And it gives you leverage.
It does give you leverage. And that's the word I was looking for.
And that's what you have, you have to be able to do it. We're right in the midst of lame duck now.
I remember one rep when I was in the House, my first term, he said, I'm so tired because I'm in a strong Republican district and they just take me as a robot. They just expect me. No one ever talks to me because they expect me to vote Republican every time. So I said, well, dude, there's some things you can't always agree with them. Let them know and voice it and start voting no, and they'll come over and say, what's going on with you? And then you start saying, I want to be relevant. I want to have some input, and I don't agree with everything, so don't take me for granted. Right. And you learn that. Now, we were both in our first terms, and that was the advice I gave him.
Give me your take on what's next for Michigan, because big changes coming here in Lansing. Yeah. Landscape of the world has changed a couple of times since you first took office, from okay economy to a horrible economy, back to what a lot of people have seen as an economy on fire, and one that now there may be some questions about, given some of the advent. No crystal ball, but what's your thought?
I think government works best sometimes. I think you need that correction. We're going through a correction right now. That's why I think a lot of Democrats got elected. People in the state of Michigan are pretty smart, and what they say is, okay, you've had your chance, we're going to give the other side a chance. And it pulls that pendulum back and forth, and it goes to what I said earlier, is I think most people are in the middle. Now, we don't like that. When I was in the House, we lost the majority. One day I was a majority vice chair, or chair of the Energy and Tech. The next day I was a minority vice chair. But I had worked so well, and the guy that became Speaker of the House was my minority vice chair, Andy Dillon, and he told me, you're not going to be out of the equation. You treated us so well and worked with us so well. We are going to have you work with us in writing this bill because you know what you're talking about on energy. And you won't see my name on the bill, but I had a lot of input into it. And Frank Accavetti, the representative chairman at the time, his name's on the bill, but it's a great bill. And it works so well. It's so funny because at the time, in 2008, no one liked it. When we started writing the 2016 bill, they said, why don't we just leave it the 2008 law? It's working just fine. And I reminded him, you told me that wasn't going to work out at all, and now you're loving it and you're supporting it. It's so funny because you're here long enough. That's what happens with term limits. You don't get that a lot of times, especially in the House. So you do have a new version out there. But I think, someone told me the other day the voters are always right. And to an extent they really are. They know when the country and or the state needs to change a little bit. It's gone too far this way and we need to bring it back. Same thing we say, what we've done the last 8 years was too far that way, we brought it back. And so in the end, I like the system of government. I like that the people's voice does matter, and they make decisions. And like someone said, I honestly believe the voters know what they're doing.
When we come back, a thought on lame duck, to the point. The lame duck section of the legislature continues in Lansing. There's a lot of legislation that is being considered. Most of it will never come to pass. That's because there won't be time, or there won't be consensus, or the governor won't go along with it. However, some pieces are sure to be signed into law. We'll continue to follow that for the next 2 weeks and report back to you right here every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 for To The Point.